PowerShell scripting, working with XML documents. I find XML documents to be a great way to store data. Easier sometimes than SQL Server, and I think you'll see why. So in this nugget, we're going to walk through what XML is, how to put one together, and how to work with this thing in Windows PowerShell. Here's what we're going to cover in this nugget. We'll start by talking about what XML actually is, and it's a lot simpler than you might realize, and we'll make a very simple XML document. Because XML doesn't really have a lot of rules, you get to make up most of the rules. And in a lot of cases, there's 2 or 3 different ways you could choose to go, and none of them are right or wrong. It's just what you want to do. And that's kind of neat. That flexibility means you don't have to worry a lot about rules. Then we're going to really get into the meat of this, which is manipulating that XML in Windows PowerShell. So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. And right there, we have a little bit of a lie, because XML isn't actually a language. Right? A language is something that you use to communicate data from one person to another. I'm just going to clean up my desktop a bit while we're talking. So, a language like Spanish lets you communicate in that particular set of rules. And a language like English is very similar, slightly different rules, definitely different syntax. XML doesn't define that sort of thing. What XML defines is more of a meta language. It's a set of rules for writing languages. So let's talk about what that means and what some of those rules are, because there's only really 2 or 3 of them. They're very, very simple. And here in the PowerShell ISE, we can actually work with the thing. If you open a new file, as I've done here, and save it, let's just call this serverdata.xml. The ISE actually recognizes XML, and once you save something as an XML file with that XML file name extension, it will properly color code this thing for us. So one of the rules with XML is that the document needs to start with one and only one top-level element. So I'm going to make one called servers. Now, an element is any set of tags, and these look a lot like HTML tags, so I tend to call them XML tags. An opening tag, like this one, servers, and a closing tag, like this one. And it's the same as the opening, but it has this little slash. Now, it's picky here. Can't have space. See how the color coding goes all wacky? It's because it doesn't recognize it anymore. No spaces, just like that. Everything else in this XML document needs to live inside those 2 tags. Everything has to be nested. So for that reason, I tend to hit tab and indent a level. Now you get to decide the structure of your XML. There's no rule that says the top level one has to be anything. You get to decide what it is. So I've decided that this document is going to contain information about the servers in my environment. And so I've decided that the top level element will be called servers. Now within there, I can create sub-elements. Now, I'm using human-based logic here. I'm going to create a child element called server. Now let's give it dc.lab.pri. Give it a server that actually exists. Every element has to have this opening and closing tag. Now, XML does not care that this is servers, plural. Therefore, this has to be server, singular. It doesn't care at all. In fact, you can have multiple different types of elements. I could have client. Oops. It's not super picky about the quotes. It's traditional to use the double quotes around these things. Oh, and we'll do something different. This element is called a singleton or self-closing element because the closing slash, which is preceded by a space, is right in the same tag. So this is the same as these 2. The trick with this one is that because it doesn't have an opening and a closing tag separately, it can't have any child tags. There's no way to jam anything else in there. So this servers tag now doesn't seem to make much sense to me as a person. XML doesn't care. We can leave this as it is and it's completely valid. But if I'm going to include elements for server and for client, maybe calling this computers would make more sense to me as a person. And you see, that's one of the benefits of XML. it can make sense to the computer. The computer can read this and parse it and break the pieces of data down. But if a person is looking at it, it can also make sense if you have built it in a sensible way. Now, I'm not really a client computer guy, so I'm going to take that out. We're just going to focus on servers. This is called an attribute. The attribute has a name, which happens to be name, and it has a value, which in this case is dc.lab.pri. So you can have multiple different attributes if you want to. We could call this, let's call it category. Right? I can do that. That's no problem. I could put department. You know, who owns this thing? Well, it's used by finance. So you can have as many of these little attributes in here as you want to. Now, each server can also have, each XML element can have more child elements, and you get to decide what those are. So let's say OS version is going to be one. And let's say BIOS is going to be another. And we'll give this one some attributes. And that'll be another self-closing tag. Now up here in OS version, we'll just put 2012 R2 or 2012. I forget what version it is, but we're actually going to write a script that'll read this information, go query the computer, grab the updated information, and then update this XML file. So we're using this XML file as a kind of database. Now I've done a couple of things here. This OS version element has contents. So the 2012 is referred to as the contents of this. The BIOS element, on the other hand, is storing information in attributes. You can do whatever you want. I could have done this and made this a self-closing element and gotten rid of all that. It doesn't matter how you choose to do things. And that's what I mean about XML not really having a super strict set of rules. Its rules are really that everything has to be nested, so things have to be contained within something else. The document has to have one top-level element and only one top-level element. And, you know, from there you just kind of get to make it up. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to add another one in here. I'm just doing a little copying and pasting. Add my client in there. And we'll leave that OS and BIOS information. So that's my server data document. That's going to serve as kind of a starting point for this entire discussion on manipulating XML. Now, why do I like XML documents? Well, for one, every computer with PowerShell knows how to read, modify, and write XML. I don't have to install SQL Server. I don't have to install any other code. All Windows computers are born with this capability. At the end of the day, this thing is just a text document. After my script finishes manipulating it, I can just file copy this someplace else. I can email it to people. I can FTP it. I can file copy it and do whatever I want to. It's very, very easy to manipulate. It also is really good at storing hierarchical information. For example, let's say I wanted to keep disk information in here. I can just decide to add another disks element, and under that, right, I can have as many of these disk elements as I want to. So the server has this information. It has disks, which have this information. So you can create this hierarchy, and that's actually a little tricky to do in SQL Server. If we did that in a SQL database, I would really need a separate table for disk information, and I'd have to have some means of relating the disks back to the server that they were plugged into. So XML is a really, I think, a great way to keep data in a really easy to use format, and you can also just pop it open in Notepad and read the thing directly. So we're going to continue to explore this XML thing. Now that we've got a basic document here, we can start looking at how we can manipulate that in Windows PowerShell. So before we do anything, I'm going to modify this a bit to take all the values out. We're going to create a kind of starting point. I'm going to take everything out. So we can start with the simplest possible starting point. Let's get all this. And then we're actually going to use Windows PowerShell to completely populate this thing so that I can kind of show you really everything you would need to know. Let's call this BIOS series. And, you know, XML can be case sensitive sometimes, so I'm just going to turn everything into lowercase. I want to put the BIOS serial number in there. I want to put the OS version in there. BIOS serial and OS version. Just sometimes keeping everything in lowercase can help avoid problems. So let's open up another script, and I'm going to save this quickly as xml.ps1. And this is just where we can start playing around with this. Now, you've probably run across the import CLI XML command. We're not going to be using that. That's designed to read a specific type of XML, the type of XML produced by export CLI XML. We didn't produce that. We produced our own type of XML. And so it's really easy to do this. I'm just going to tell PowerShell to cast this variable as an XML document using the text get content from C server data XML. So get content is going to read this just as pure text, just like Notepad would open it. And it's going to try and jam it into this variable. But this variable has been typed as XML. So it's going to force PowerShell to try and actually read through and parse the XML. So we'll do that, and then I'll just quickly display the content so you can see what PowerShell does with it. We'll run that. And you don't get much. It's just showing you that, hey, there's a top-level servers document element, and it contains servers. Woo! Well, at that point, we probably want to enumerate through those servers. So, for example, let's see. You know, I'm kind of bummed about using servers now. Let's call it computers. I want to keep this a little generic. I'm starting to feel bad that I chose server. And that's the neat thing, is that you can go change this anytime you want to. And the reason I'm feeling bad is because I've got it querying my client computer, and my client isn't a server, and I'm just kind of a purist that way. All right. So now that I've got that information, how would I do something with it? Well, one thing I could do is say for each $computer in the XML documents computers collection, grabbing each computer element. Now let's talk about what that is. Over here in the XML, I have a top-level computers, and that contains one or more computer elements. And I know that because I'm the one who made the document. I know it because I made up the rules here. So I'm saying, go into the XML document, look at its computers element. Now that's the top-level element, and grab each computer that you find. Now look, here's the neat thing. If I had done other elements like phone, this would only grab the ones that matched what I typed. It would only grab the computers. It would ignore the phone element because that isn't what I asked for. So it's kind of a neat thing. This is then going to give me each of those computer elements. And so just as a real simple test, let's do a write output here. Computer, and we'll do a sub-expression, and we'll grab the computer element, right? Because that's what we're populating. We're taking the XML element out of the document and sticking it into this PowerShell variable so that we can work with it. And each of those has a name. So let's run that. Computer is dc.lab.pri, computer client.lab.pri. So we'll double pane this here. You can see that this got me each computer element and put it into a variable so that I could work with it. And then the attribute of that element becomes a property that I can access. So when I access that property, I get its value. So that's pretty neat stuff. Now there's another way that you can also, I'm going to leave that right there. There's another way you can get to specific things, and it's called using XPath. So let's just try and grab a particular node. And that'll start with the document, and I'll ask it to select a single node. So this is a method, meaning it's going to have these parentheses. And then I give it an XPath query. XPath, spelled X-P-A-T-H, is a query language that's used to select information from an XML document. Now, we're not going to go into a super deep tutorial on XPath. You can find plenty of them online if you want. We're going to say, grab me a node that is a computer node where its attribute name, so that's what the @ sign means, where the attribute name equals client.lab.pri. and I need to finish my square bracket. So that's an XPath query. It's saying go to the root of the document, find me the first, because I said select single node, find me the first computer element with an attribute name of client.lab.pri. That should return a node. So we're going to just do this. Write the node name is $ for a sub expression, and in there we'll refer to our node variable and try and grab its name property. Yeah, so let's run this. There it is. The node name is client.lab.pri. So that's how you can go in and select just a single node. Not bad. Two different ways to read this. This is going to let me enumerate through everything in there. This is going to go let me find a particular one. Both of these are about to become important as we start modifying the XML. So I'm just going to comment this out. Oops. And we can leave that there as kind of a reference for what the syntax should look like. But right now, I'm going to change this to a query. I'm going to go get some information. BIOS equals get wMyObject class Win32 BIOS from the computer that is in $computer.name. And then BIOS serial is going to be the BIOS.serial number. So I retrieved that information. Now I need to actually stick it into the XML, right? Well, that's actually not all that difficult because I already have a reference to the computer object, to the computer node in the XML. And so I'll just say, hey, your BIOS serial, look, it's even read the file and it knows that that element is there. Your BIOS serial equals whatever the BIOS serial was, right? Now, I'm going to let it run that because I've got two computers in there, if you remember. So I'm going to let it run that, and then I'm just going to display XML.innerXML because that'll display the raw XML for me. Let's try running it and see if it works. So it ran. Now look what we got here. Here's the first computer. Here's the OS version, unmodified, and here's the BIOS serial element all filled in. And here's the client, and here's its BIOS serial element all filled in. Well, so now we can probably, if we want to, go back and get the same information for the operating system. We're going to hold off there, though. I want to do that slightly different. And instead of displaying the XML, I really want to write this back out to disk. So we'll say XML.save, and we'll give it the file name, cserverdata.xml. Made a change. Always good to test after you make a change. Okay, we made the change. Now let's go back in and we're going to close this because that file's actually changed. So let's see if we can open it back up and see if it actually did save the changes to disk. Oh, it doesn't want to open XML by default. Let's change that to XML server data. Yep. So it did write the file back out to disk. Awesome. So it's a simple way. That's the way you can stick information into an element as the value of that element. So next step, all right, now you're really going to see my retentiveness kick in. I'm going to start breaking this down into sections. There's really no need for BIOS serial to be in a separate variable. Let's just do this, and we can save a wee bit of memory. All right, so the next thing I'm going to query is the system information. Get wMyObject class, operating system, no, computer system, Win32 computer system. Computer system, because I'll show you what we're going to do. System, computer dot name. So now we've got another whole variable with stuff to play with. So what do we want to do with this computer system information? Well, I think what I want to do is show you how to create an all new node in XML. We'll put manufacturer information into it. So new node, because we have to save it to a variable so we have a way to play with it afterwards. I'm going to ask the XML document itself to create a node because it knows how to do this. And the node name is going to be, the node type is going to be an element. And the node name is going to be manufacturer. And that's really all we're going to do with it right now. New node, inner text, so this is what's inside of it, is going to equal sys, that's what I queried above from WMI, manufacturer. And then we're going to take the computer element that we already have, which is where we want this thing to go into, and append a child to it. And the child we're going to append is new node. Now that will produce some output, and I don't really want to see it on the screen, so we're just going to pipe it to out null. All right, save that. Let's run it. No, nothing bad happened. And let's reopen that XML file and see what it looks like now. There's our manufacturer node. Woohoo! Awesome! So the next thing we can do, let's see, what do we want to do next? Let's get some operating system information going. OS equals get WMI object class Win32 operating system. And you know what I'm going to do? We're going to save this to 2. I'm going to go back and update this original one and set it kind of back to the beginning state so that we're always starting with this, because it'll make the discussion a little bit more fun. This will always be the blank file, and then we'll write it to a different one so that we can see the before and the after a little bit more clearly. All right. So we're querying Win32 operating system. Lost track of myself. Computer.name. There we go. All right, so what do we want to do with this? I think what I want to do is show you how to create a new attribute. So again, we're going to put this into a variable, and we're going to be doing this by asking the XML document to create an attribute for us. The attribute name is going to simply be build, and that needs to go in quotes, not whatever that was. Let's give it a value, attr.value equals whatever the OS, and we queried that above, so we're going to take the build number property that we queried from WMI, and then on our computer node, we're going to set an attribute, and the attribute we're going to set is that one, and again, that's going to produce some output, so I'm going to pipe it to out null, and we're allowing it to write to server data 2.xml now, so I can run this. Ooh, waka waka waka. Error, error, error. Let's see what happened here. Oh, right, duh. Wrong variable. I put the attribute in new attr, and I got carried away and didn't type that. Run it again. Set attribute. Cannot find an overload. Okay, that usually means I forgot a parameter. Now, in this case, it's because I hit tab complete too quick. The actual thing we want to use is set attribute node. Set attribute requires you to specify the node you want to set the attribute on, as well as the new attribute. This is going to take this node and set that attribute. So I'm just trying to give you the syntax to make these things happen. See if this works. No news is good news. Let's open up our output file. So this is what that did. It added a build attribute to the computer node. So now you know how to add an attribute, how to set an attribute, how to set an element, and how to add an entire element. So really, those are the big things you need to know how to do to manipulate XML. So now you're really going to see kind of where I get crazy about this. I don't like leaving this just as a text script thing like this. I want to make it into a function. So I'm going to wrap the whole thing in big curly brackets. Now, I do not like hard coding things like file names. In fact, I don't even like this thing taking its input this way. Here's what I want to do. I want to set up, first of all, I'm always going to make things an advanced function if I have any say about it. I'll create a little parameter block, and I'm going to, as a parameter, ask for an XML document. And we are going to make that mandatory. Let's see here. Parameter mandatory equals true. and I will say that it accepts its value from the pipeline. Right? And so I can accept that XML from the pipeline. That means I don't need to do this anymore because I'm getting my XML as input. And the other thing I like is, well, I guess you could decide how you want to deal with the output a couple of ways. You could output the XML itself to the pipeline, and that's completely fine. You could have a parameter that says, where do you want me to save the final XML? That would be fine too. I think what I want to do is just output the inner XML to the pipeline. Because that way my function doesn't need to worry about where the XML is coming from, and it doesn't need to worry about where it's going. So let's see how I would now use this. What did I call this? Update. Oh, that's horrible. Update XML inventory. So how would I use this? Well, we'll start by, I'll show you a neat trick down here at the command line. Let's do a get content of my server data.xml. Right, that's just text. Pipe it to convert to XML, and it converts it to XML, which in theory means get content server data C server data XML convert to XML. That gets it into the form of XML. So now I can do my update XML inventory data, and then I can take the resulting text out to a file. Right? Hopefully that works, right? Now I feel that I could cheat a little here, so I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to delete server data2.xml so that there's no chance of me cheating whatsoever. And let's try this. So we'll run that. Oop, no errors. So I mean that's the way I tend to approach these things. Is start in a script, really just kind of work my way through it, get everything working, but then build it into a function. Make sure that all of its input comes on parameters. And you know, there's lots of ways you could choose to do this. We could make this a string and say input file path and have another parameter mandatory equals true string output file path, and now I can build back in here XML equals get content input file path, and then after I manipulate everything, go back to saving this, save output file path. Right, so there's lots of different ways you can do it. The point is you want to avoid hard coding values, and this is another way to let me do that. So let's test this one. Update XML inventory data input file path C server data. Oops, server data output file path C server data 2. We'll save that, run the script, and then just real quick, let's check server data 2. And there's my updated XML. So that's working too. So there's lots of ways you could choose to go about this. But the idea is after you build something this complicated, wrap it in a tool so that someone else can use it more easily. Now I could then put this into a script module and make it available to anybody, share it with the rest of my team, obviously add a lot more information to that file, and it becomes a really powerful inventory database. There are plenty of tools that can load that XML and then generate attractive looking reports. So we're using PowerShell to generate data, just as we did in the previous nugget about SQL Server, but we're storing that data in a different form now. So we looked at a pretty good set of information here. I explained what XML is and how you really get to make most of the rules for what your XML documents look like. And we made a little XML document to start with. Then I showed you how we can manipulate XML right in PowerShell. Walked you through a good set of techniques that helps you write scripts that can read an XML document as their input, go collect data or whatever, and then store that data back in the XML document and write it back out to disk. It's a great way to store data, much, much better than CSV files, often easier to work with than SQL Server once you kind of get the knack for it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.